Hello, and thank you for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela, where we enlighten, inspire, and empower you to become your best self. The tongue is a small thing that makes grand speeches, but a tiny spark can set a great forest on fire, and that's what I want to do. Hi, I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Today, our special guest is Christian Josh, and he is of 146 Community. You can find them online at 146community.com, and he is found here locally in Atlanta, Georgia. So becoming more self-sufficient and in preparation for the end times. Well, as Christians, we know that Jesus will come again, and we also know that there will be 7 years of tribulation before he does. The question is, are you prepared? Well, let me tell you a little bit about Josh. Josh is the founder of 146 Community, an international Christian community in Atlanta, Georgia that aims to deepen their relationship with Christ while living a more self-sufficient and meaningful life. He is also the founder of Christian Preppers Living Intentionally, a meetup group in Atlanta that educates people on how to prepare their house and their heart for the tough times that may be ahead. Well, without any further ado, let's bring Josh on the line. Hello, Josh. How are you?
Hey, Dr. Angela. I'm doing great. Thanks so much for having me today.
Thank you so much for joining me. I love it. I absolutely love what you are doing, and I totally love the concept of prepping, and I think that we should always be prepared for what life can bring us. So I can't wait to hear more about your community and to tell us a little bit more about the Christian aspects of prepping as well. But before we get into all of that, I want to make sure that people understand who you are, what you do, all that great stuff. So if you can you tell us a little bit more about 146 Community?
Sure. So my name is Josh. I typically go by Christian Josh in media and different interviews that I do. And I'm the founder of 146 Community. So what 146 is it's an intentional community of Christians living together and working together and building something a little bit different outside of the current paradigm of the traditional system. And it comes from biblical principles. So it actually comes from the Bible, from John chapter 14, verse 6, which Jesus says, I am the way and the truth and the life. No one comes to the Father except through me. So it's understanding that Jesus is our personal Lord and Savior, and understanding how we can live a more moral and a more centered and ultimately a more fulfilling life by living in accordance with biblical principles. So here we have a community. We are in the suburbs of Atlanta. We're in the greater Marietta area. And here we have a home that is on about a half-acre homestead. And so what that means is we have plenty of vegetables growing and fruit trees and different things like that, and I know we're going to get more into detail about that later. And so we aim to be more self-sufficient. We aim to have the personal responsibility to just operate more independently if we need to, if there's tough times ahead. And so right now we have, it's myself, and there's a young lady who's also here, and there's also an older gentleman who's coming. And there's some dogs and some animals and critters and a bunch of other stuff. And that's what we're doing here.
So I know that if I understand correctly, of course, this is biblical principle and we should act accordingly. But I know that there's also that personal aspect of it and your understanding and taking Scripture to heart. So for lack of a better phrase, and I use the word vision as vaguely, but answer as specifically as you like, what is the overall vision of the community, or what is your vision for 146 Community?
Awesome. That's a really great question. So right now we're still in the building phase of of what we're doing here in Marietta. Like I said, it is a pretty modest setup. It's about a half acre, which is enough to grow some good fruit trees and raise some small livestock and grow some gardens, but it's ultimately just the first step in where we want to be. What I would like to do next year, God willing, if it's God's will and God's plan, is to be able to invest in a larger acreage property, a little bit more rural from here, maybe about 30, 45 minutes from here, and just to be able to do things on a little bit of a larger scale and be able to get some larger livestock and do some larger operations in regards to growing crops. So my vision for what we're doing here in the suburbs is kind of a microcosm of what I want to be able to do on a larger scale. It's kind of like when you go into a subdivision and you look at the model house that they've built and you go, okay, I get how this is laid out. I get how this works. It makes sense to me. And so we want to do that on a larger scale, God willing, when we're able to get a larger tract of property, probably in 2018. So that's where we're going with the homestead. And I'd also like to take a second and talk about what we're doing in terms of outreach. So it's important for us as Christians to be able to engage with the greater community and even the greater world. And so to that end, as a community here, we have just helped sponsor and stand up a Christian education center, a Sunday school, in Asia, so in Myanmar. And so there's a video on my YouTube channel about that. We're actually able to work with the local missionary there, and we've started a school there, and there's about a dozen children who are predominantly orphans, and they are being educated not only in Christianity but also in basic reading, writing, things like that, and they're getting a good meal there. And we've sponsored that as part of our tithes and offerings, or out of our tithes and offerings, in Asia. And so that is really a part of our greater vision, to speak to your point, Dr. Angela. So it's not just to take 14.6 from a suburban model to a more self-sufficient model on larger acreage. It is to do that, but also what I want to do is take these projects, these centers that we're building here, and start them all over the country and potentially all over the world, so we can have locally based communities where Christians are coming together, living more simple, self-sufficient lives and giving back to their greater community, and have this network of centers that are doing that exact thing around the nation and potentially around the world. So that's part of the greater vision of what we're doing here.
And, you know, we know that we have to have vision, that we can't just play it by ear in every situation, and especially when we're talking about our business, no matter if that's a ministry or if it's a church or if it's a community center, there always has to be that vision. But out of that vision, there's always that personal passion. So thank you so much for sharing that as well. Now, I know that, again, if we look at this from a biblical perspective, we do this, the being prepared. We do this because we understand that Christ is coming back. There may be someone who is unfamiliar with this concept. They may have just found my program for what they think is happenstance, which I don't believe anything is happenstance. Everything happens for a purpose and a reason. But could you tell us or remind us about what is the second coming of Christ and why that's so important?
Absolutely, Dr. Angela, and that's a really great question. So as Christians, we do know that Christ has come the first time for us and given his life as a propitiation for our sins. And we also know that in God's greater plan of redemption that Christ will be coming back. And while that is an amazing and wonderful and incredible thing, there's also going to be some hard times that come with that, and that is all biblical and that is all scriptural. So some of the main references that we have in regards to the canon of knowledge about exactly what's going to happen are found in Matthew chapter 24, and they're also found in the book of Revelation in chapter 6, chapter 13, and chapter 14. So those are some good references for some of the concepts that we're going to be speaking about for the next couple minutes. So specifically in Matthew, Jesus is asked directly about what are the signs of the coming of the end of the end of time, and Jesus talks about this pretty specifically. So there's sort of an order of end time events that we can have a really quick overview. So the first thing that is prophesied is that many will come in the name of Jesus, saying that they are the Christ. These are false messiahs, and we are to watch out for them. And Jesus does give us some specific instruction about how to differentiate the false messiahs from him. Mm-hmm. We know the next step in the end time eschatology, or the eschaton, in general, is going to be, it says, for nation will rise against nation and kingdom against kingdom. And so that's talking about interpersonal and international conflict that's going to occur. And I personally believe that we're seeing some of the signs of that even now in some of the troubles that we're experiencing in the world. Mm-hmm. Next up, we have an expectation of various famines and earthquakes in various places. This is Matthew chapter 24, verse 7, and also in Revelation chapter 6. And then we have something that is really unfortunate, and that Christians have been experiencing since the beginning of Christianity, since the times of Paul and Peter until now, which is falling victim to anti-Christian persecution. Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm. So it is said that they will deliver you to tribulation, and they will kill you, and you will be hated by all nations because of my name. And many will fall away from the faith because of that reason. But Jesus reminds us the one who stands firm will be saved. So preparation is really about how do we not only get our house in order, so have the physical things that we might need, food, water, etc., to survive and thrive in a potential persecution or potential tough times, but it's also how do we get our heart ready? How do we get ourselves ready to receive our Lord and Savior when He's going to come?
I love that, and thank you so much for giving the scriptural references as well, especially for people that are unfamiliar. Like I said, you never know who's listening, and we can't just assume that everyone is familiar or everyone knows or even knows where to go. You may have heard about it, but you don't know where to read it for your own, for yourself or with your own eyes. So thank you so much for sharing that. And I like how you said that we need to be prepared, not just in word, but like in deed, that we need to not just be prepared in deed, but also in word, that we need to be prepared spiritually, we need to be prepared physically for what is about to happen, and to not be afraid about what's going to happen, because we've already been told, one, that it's going to happen, but that, two, we have to remember that we already have the victory in it all, but we just need to be prepared for that. Well, Josh, we have about a minute or so before we need to go to break, but I want to make sure that people know where to find you on social media and all of that good stuff. Could you please remind them of how can people get in contact with you?
Sure. So the two primary ways that we put out content and engage with people are through our website, which is 146community.com. That's just the number 1, the number 4, the number 6, community.com. Again, that comes from John 14:6. And we also have a YouTube channel called 146 Community on YouTube. And we put out different videos of the garden, of the critters. Some topics are Christian-focused in terms of scripture. Some are more focused on homesteading and, hey, how do you raise rabbits, or hey, how do you raise chickens, or something like that. So it's kind of a blend of that. But we put out content a couple times a week typically on the YouTube channel. So those are some ways to get to know a little bit more about us and connect with us.
Gotcha. Well, listeners, don't you go anywhere. We need to take a very short break, but when we return, we will continue to speak with Josh of 146 Community. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Tester. Today we are talking about becoming more self-sufficient in preparation for the end times. And that's right, as Christians, we know that Jesus will come again, and there will be 7 years of tribulation before he does. And the question that we're posing today is, are you prepared? We are visiting with Josh of 146 Community. You can find them online, like you said earlier, at 146community.com. So, Josh, I want to talk a little bit about preparedness. Many people don't know what that is in the first place, and then we're talking about this whole Christian being prepared thing, and they're going, I have no idea what you're talking about. Can you explain to the people that may not know what that is? What are some baby steps in also getting to this prepared state? What are you talking about here?
Absolutely, and that's a really great question. So being prepared and the art and practice of preparedness basically refers to storing some things away in a time of plenty for a time of lack. And really, the principles are biblical. And so we know that the Bible has certain rules and regulations in regards to how we are supposed to use our income. And so for me, just personally, I am a tither, so we give 10% of our increase to others and to the body of the church. And so that's a really important scriptural principle. And there's a lot of really cool things that happen and change in your life when you start to tithe. So the question is, what do you do with the other 90%? Well, I know sometimes when people are listening to stuff like this, they might be saying, man, I'm barely able to, make ends meet at the end of the month. I'm barely able to pay my bills right now. You're talking about preparing for the future. What's that about? And so, and that's a very real concern, right?
Yeah, most definitely.
But you can take baby steps towards getting more prepared. And so in the preparedness community, we're typically talking about things like food and water. So you're always going to need to eat, and you're always going to need to drink water. And so we need to really think about ways to prepare. If you're blessed enough to be gainfully employed and have some sort of income coming in, then you can start putting stuff away. And it can be really as small as just putting away a little bit of extra food each week. So something that I suggest, and I have a YouTube video about this, about some basic things to buy when you're just getting into preparedness. You see that the world is getting a little bit crazy. You're a Christian and you know that you need to prepare for future situations. What do you do? It can be as simple as going to the grocery store each week and buying a couple extra cans of beans and buying an extra little bag of rice and putting it at the back of your pantry. It could be as simple as getting some boxed foods of pasta, or, we're talking about bulk foods that's stored for a good amount of time and that you can access. And who knows, maybe your emergency is not some catastrophe where there's a nuclear war or Christ himself, or the possibility of Christ himself coming back, but maybe, God forbid, maybe you just lose your job, or maybe you have a situation in your family, or maybe someone that comes on hard times, and you're able to, have the basic amount of food to be able to eat from. So food is a big component of being able to put stuff away. And then also, we would be mistaken if we weren't talking about putting away, extra money each month. And it doesn't have to be a lot. It can be $20, $50, $100 a month or a week or whatever you can afford. But, just putting some money away and having an emergency fund so that if something bad were to happen to you or unexpected were to happen, you would be able to deal with it. I know as preppers, a lot of us are guilty about not even doing that step because we get so excited about buying our food and getting our little gadgets and doodads that, we end up overextending ourselves sometimes and, not doing the basic stuff. But this basic stuff of storing away extra income after your tithe and after your expenses, storing food, and then there's the opportunity to store water too. And it doesn't have to be super crazy, but you could go to the store and get a couple of those 24 packs of bottles of water and put them in your garage and rotate through them, so that way, you're using them. You can buy gallons of water. You can buy even Costco and Sam's Club sell a very simple 55-gallon drum. And what that is it's just a food-safe barrel that you can keep in your garage or even in your backyard. You just take your hose and you fill it up with water. Again, it fills up 55 gallons. And then if something were to happen where you were to have an emergency, even if it's a natural disaster, a hurricane, a tornado, just something that might disrupt water service, you can have those 55 gallons of water. And most experts say that it takes about a gallon of water per person per day to sustain life. So if you have a 55-gallon drum, you're talking about potentially 55 days if you're one person, about 25 days if you're two people, or about 2 weeks for a family of 4 to be able to get through an event. And many events, that is a good start.
Just the water alone. And thank you so much for breaking down the 55 gallons, because I know there's someone going, wow, that's far too much water. Why would I want to have that? Surely these gallons of water that I have is fine. But when you think about a family of 4, that's only 2 weeks worth of water, it changes it from, oh my goodness, it's only 2 weeks worth of water, to 55 gallons being a lot of water when you put it in perspective. Thank you so much for that. Being a family, I think it's so important that you think about the all that you need. And I think you mentioned that sometimes even preppers forget that you need to make sure that you have those very, very basic things. I know that my son is very much into just being prepared and having certain things in the house. That's his thing. He loves the outdoors and all of that. So putting together even like an emergency kit, or like you said, going to maybe the dollar store, the 99-cent stores or something like that if you're on a tight budget, and getting that extra bag of rice or those extra bags of beans. Such great and wonderful, easy-to-do tips to get started. And listeners, when you get started, I'm telling you, you're going to feel so proud of yourself when you have your bin or your container and it's stocked with some stuff, and you look at it and say, I'm ready. You know, like you said, if it's a hurricane or earthquake or whatever it is, and it may not be the second coming quite at that moment, but you're still going to be prepared, and you're going to feel so much better about yourself. Now, when we're talking about growing our own food, now I'm a gardener. I love the garden that I have. I have a little bit of everything. We are, by today's standard, a really big family. There's 5 of us, so I need to be able to feed 4 men and myself. Men folk, as I say, because it's my husband, and then I have an 18-year-old, a 17-year-old, and a about to be 15-year-old. So that's a lot of food that I need to be able to grow. When you're growing your own food, is there a particular way that we're supposed to think of it? Like, do you grow so much lettuce per person, or are you thinking more so, I have this much space and I need to be able to produce enough food to grow X amount of people?
That's a really great question. So when you're talking about self-sufficiency as it pertains to growing food, it's kind of a moving target, because I don't want to say that you never get there, because I don't want to discourage anybody, but every step that you take along the path of self-sufficiency moves you forward. You may not be a self-contained commune or self-contained system, but every step that you take is really important. So, for example, going back to the topic of food, what a lot of preppers will do is when they start out, they'll get cans of food and bags of rice and boxes of pasta and things that I mentioned. That's a really good start. Then as an intermediary, they'll go to some bulk food places, and they might get bulk bags of flour, bulk bags of wheat. So you're talking about your staple calorie type crops. But at some point in your prepping journey, or even in your journey to be a more responsible citizen in terms of being able to take care of yourself, you realize that there's only so much food I can store. I can't store a lifetime supply of rice and beans. If you can, God bless you. But most of us just can't. Most of us don't have the money or the space if we did have it. So the question then becomes, how do I produce my food on a more ongoing basis? And you brought up a really great point about the garden. Now, gardening is something that a lot of people can be intimidated by. I know I was intimidated by it before I got into it. But really, gardening is really as simple as following directions about where things should go, what kind of soil they should go into, and how much water they should get and sunlight they should get, and having a little bit of luck. So if you can do that, you'll be in pretty good shape. When we started our gardens here the first year, we started something really simple called 5-gallon bucket gardens and also raised bed gardens. So a 5-gallon bucket garden is exactly as it sounds. You go to your local hardware store, ours of choice is Home Depot, and you get some 5-gallon buckets. Now, you need to make sure that they have a food grade symbol on the bottom of them. The buckets that they have at Home Depot do, so they're about $2 or $3. And buy about maybe 10 of them. And you go home and you drill some holes in the bottom, and you fill them with soil. And then you put various fruits and vegetables in that soil. So we have different kinds of potatoes growing in there. So we have russet potatoes in one, Yukon Gold potatoes, red potatoes. You can put a tomato plant in each one. You can put a pepper plant in each one. So that's some really simple container gardening. So if you're just getting into gardening, I would suggest you go online and do some searches about container gardening, and that will help you get a good start on a nice little garden. Now, when you want to take things a step further, like we have at the community here, we're using raised beds. So we're using pieces of 2x6 and 2x8 lumber and combining them in a big rectangle and then putting it on the ground, tilling the ground, and then filling it with more soil. And so there we have all different types of vegetables growing, peppers, tomatoes, sweet potatoes, lettuce, just all different kinds of stuff. And you want to be able to produce that. And that's going to take your gardening skills to the next level. That's going to require a little bit more maintenance and a little bit more weeding, but it's going to be really worth it when you see the result of your labor.
It really does. I absolutely loved. I remember when my what was the first thing that popped up? I think my squash may have popped up first, and then the first time my potato sprouted. Speaking of potatoes, when they get those beautiful little potato blossoms and all of that, or the first time with our fruits, I think I had cantaloupe, and I saw that tiny little cantaloupe growing on the vine. Each thing in its own right, you know. I remember my first little snow pea, and I remember each and every little thing. It's like we have kale, we have lettuce, you know, we have these things, and each thing I was so proud of the fact that it had grown. I was so proud that I could go out and I could literally tell my boys or my husband, "It's okay, we're gonna have tacos tonight. So could someone go get some tomatoes, or could someone go get some lettuce?" And it was not at the store, but from our yard, from our garden. And I'm just taking all these pictures and I'm sharing them on Pinterest and all of this. And it's like, you feel so wonderful because, one, it just reminds you of this connection that I think that we have with the Creator, in that we've grown something in this tiny little seed, because I did my stuff from seeds, not from little baby plants, but it was, this seed has turned into this food, and the peace that you get from that and the connection that you have with Earth again. And come to find out, my boys loved it much more than any of us thought that they were going to enjoy being out there, you know, plucking out weeds from the garden. But it really and truly is a very beautiful thing. And listeners, if you were thinking about doing it, you should definitely give it a try. It is wonderful. Well, I need to go to break, but don't worry, we will be right back. We will continue to speak with Christian Josh. We'll be back right after this. And we are back. Thank you so much for joining me for Daily Spark with Dr. Angela. I'm your host, Dr. Angela Chester. Today we are talking about becoming more self-sufficient in preparation for end times. And our special guest today is Christian Josh. He is of 146 Community, and you can find them online at 146, those are the numbers, 146community.com, and they are based here in the Atlanta metro. So, Josh, we were talking about growing our own foods and how we store our water and our food and all of that. But I want to touch a little bit more on, and you were telling us how we could do it as individuals, but I want to kind of shift a little bit and go to what's there in your community. Can you tell us a little bit about your gardens, and you talk about your beautiful fruit trees and all of that. Can you tell us more about that?
Absolutely. So we were talking about how to get started with gardening, and I introduced some ways that were a little bit easier to get started with, like container gardening and gardening in raised beds, some of which we actually still do because they're just so easy and wonderful and awesome. Mm-hmm. But if you want to take things to the next level, you need to start thinking about some other ways to produce food, and that's sort of what we've done here on the community. So the first thing that I did when I purchased this property, and I purchased it very intentionally with the particular backyard that gets the sun exposure that it does and all those other things. Mm-hmm. If you want to plan where you're going to put your larger installations, we're talking about berry bushes and fruit trees. So you want to look on your property and understand, okay, I can put a fruit tree here or I can put a berry bush here, and you want to understand how it's all going to work together. If anyone is extra interested and wants extra credit, they can look up the word permaculture online, and they will find out ways of designing human, animal, plant life ecosystems that all work together. And so we've taken some pages out of the permaculture playbook in designing exactly what we're going to have back here and how it's going to be laid out in relation to all the other elements that we have on the property. So one of the things that really attracted me about berry bushes were their size. They're pretty small, and you can buy them already grown, about 2 years old in pots. And so we have, I think, 5 blueberry bushes here, 3 raspberry bushes, and 6 blackberry bushes. And, they're pretty affordable. Each bush is maybe $15 or $20. Even a Home Depot store will be selling them during the springtime. I actually picked one up from there on a whim. And yeah, that's what happens when you get into gardening and stuff like that. You see something and you go, I want that in my garden. And then you end up with all this stuff. But if you lay it out intelligently, you can have enough space not only for your garden and your fruit trees, but also, to have areas to play with the dogs and, walk around and things like that. So we've also invested in some dwarf fruit trees. So these are fruit trees that grow to be about maybe 8 to 10 feet tall, maybe about 15 feet tall for some of the larger varieties, and only about that much wide, so again, about 8 feet wide. So unlike a traditional tree, which might grow to be 30 or 50 feet tall and take up a ton of room, these dwarf trees have a much smaller footprint. And so because we're able to get dwarf fruit trees, we're able to put 2 pear trees, 2 apple trees, a plum tree, a persimmon tree, 2 fig trees, an almond tree. We're able to fit, those are just some off the top of my head. We're able to fit those, on a pretty modest property. We have about a half acre, which only comes out to be about 100 feet by about 250 feet property. And, we're able to have about maybe 12 or 15 different fruit trees because we got dwarf fruit trees. So and another benefit about going with the berry bushes and fruit trees are once you get them in the ground and you get them in good shape in terms of production and you wait a couple years patiently, they end up producing for you for many, many, many years, unlike your regular gardens where I have to plant my tomatoes every year. But my fruit trees, once they get going, they bear fruit every year. And
I love that. when you're patient, like you said, and you think about being prepared, boy, can you really be prepared if you're willing to just do what you're supposed to do when you need to do it and be patient for it to come. Because there have been many times where you inherit someone else's fruit tree just because that person may have passed away and their property is for sale, or you go over and visit and people say, yeah, my grandfather planted this avocado tree and it's still producing trees. So it really can be a very beautiful thing. Now, you also mentioned that you have critters on the farm. So I'm assuming these critters are like you have some hens, some chickens, some dogs, all that good stuff. Tell us more about your critters.
Sure. So, again, these are just realizations that you start having as you start getting more and more self-sufficient, right? The first was, hey, I can't store enough food forever. The second is, I'm going to start growing some food, and then I want to grow things that keep coming back, like berry bushes and fruit trees. Well, then at some point you're like, hey, if things really go sideways, I love apples, but I don't really want to eat apples all day, every day, right? And you need to get that protein in. And so there are some options that you have in small spaces. One option that's becoming more and more popular in many areas are having egg-laying hens, and they really don't take up a lot of space. They take about a little handful of feed each day, and on average you'll get about an egg a day from each chicken. So let's say you had 3 chickens, you're going to get about 15 or so eggs a week. And, depending on how much your family eats eggs, that may be enough, or you may need to add in another chicken or 2, but it's pretty simple. They require, like I said, a handful of food and, a waterer where they can get water, and a coop where they can be protected from the elements and also from predators, and they can really provide great food for you. Another option, and we haven't done this one yet, but this is the winter plan. We bought the infrastructure for it. You can go online and get these little kiddie pools. They're little splash pools. They are maybe 5 feet by about 10 feet rectangular and about 2 feet tall. They hold about 500 gallons of water. And we've bought a couple of them, and we're going to put them behind a shed that we have, which has power. We're going to fill them up with water, and we're going to put some pumps in there, and we're going to give a go for doing some backyard fish farming. And this is something called aquaculture or aquaponics, depending on how you have it set up. And you can have fish and give them pellets of food each day and have a pump that's cleaning out their water. And you can have your very own fish market in your backyard. You can have your very own pond on a very small footprint, if you're willing to invest in some of the infrastructure and do it the right way so that the water is clean and the fish are in good shape. So that's something we're looking into as well in terms of, how do we get that? We want ongoing food, but we also want a balance of food, and we also need to meet our various protein and carbohydrate and fat ratios that we all need to survive.
And wouldn't it be wonderful, like you said, if something were to happen, that you have the option of having a fresh fish for dinner, or lunch or whatever it is. The things that are so commonplace for us today, it's like, oh, I think I want, some mahi-mahi. I was like, okay, this is, wonderful. But if we were in a disaster time and we're talking preparedness, getting some fish for your salad would be extremely hard, or even having the fresh salad to begin with may be difficult. So all of these things, and I know someone's thinking, hey, this is really, really awesome. These lifestyle changes will definitely work, and getting down and helping the community and being a part of the community is definitely something that I think is beneficial for everyone that's in the local Atlanta metro, which leads me to my very last question for you, and that is working outside of a traditional system of what we think as, the traditional rat race or traditional corporate America. And not that there's anything wrong with that, because it is a way to provide for our family. But If you want something a little bit different, can you tell us a little bit more about how do we make that transition, or is it okay to make that transition, and when do we know that it's the right time?
Awesome. So as we start becoming more self-sufficient, as we start having greater autonomy in our own lives, producing our own food, not going to the grocery store as much, going to feed stores to get stuff for our livestock instead of grocery stores, we start to realize that there are simpler ways to live life that may be more meaningful for us and may be more enjoyable. And that sitting in an office 80 hours a week might not really be the thing that we most want to do, although in many cases it is what we have to do for a season. Mm-hmm. But that season doesn't have to be forever, and that's something that we're working on right now, and we're kind of in the middle of it. But a lot of the individuals I know who have little homesteads or farmsteads will sell extra produce that they have and generate an income that way outside of the traditional system. And increasingly, with the rise of the Internet and being able to do things, create websites, create courses and products, or even just create a following of people who want to engage and participate in what you're doing, there are ways to start businesses that are primarily home-based and primarily online-based that can have you working outside the traditional system. And that's something that I'm working on right now. I won't say that I've 100% mastered it yet, but we're working on it. And, my ultimate goal as an individual, so we've talked a lot about community, but my individual goal is to, find the young lady that will be my wife, and then be able to have a family and have children and be able to spend time with them and be able to raise them and be able to, go into the garden in the morning and, get breakfast. And those are the things that I want to do, and those are the things that I'm building towards. And we have a huge opportunity now in this Internet age to be able to create businesses and to be able to create projects that can deliver us income in ways that are outside of the traditional 9 to 5, or as it's now becoming 8 to 6.
And I love how you said that even though it's your individual goal, that when we find that perfect match, when we have that perfect spouse, that it not only becomes just the individual goal, but it becomes a couple goal, which becomes a family goal, and it definitely changes the footprint of the community as a whole, because you are able to cut down on some of those harmful habits that we've had in years past simply because we didn't know any better. And being able to correct and assess and be able to not only teach our children better ways of doing things or different ways of doing things, we're preparing not just for the immediacy of, like you were saying earlier, the immediacy of maybe a natural disaster, but we're also going to be prepared for these end times that we know at some particular time is going to happen. And I really like how you're able to tie all of that in together. Well, just in case someone happens upon the show a little bit early, and sorry, listener, we only have about a minute or so left in the show, but I hope that you got something out of the minutes that you were able to listen, because I think this was a really great show, and it's really told us about perspective and ways to think outside of the box and some things that we can do to really be prepared. Josh, if you can, please let the listeners know how can they get in contact with you? What are the best ways?
Sure. So you can learn more about our community and the projects that we're doing and contact us at 146community.com. That's the number 1, the number 4, the number 6, community.com. You can also check out our YouTube videos on YouTube with the same channel name, 146 Community on there. We put out several new videos a week on average, ranging from topics on Christianity to gardening to how to raise this particular kind of animal to a problem that you might be having with this tactic in gardening. And we just really try and add as much value as we can, not only to our local community, but also to our online community as well.
Well, Josh, thank you so much for being a guest here on Daily Spark with me today.
Thank you so much for having me.
And listeners, as always, may the Lord continue to shine his face upon you. May you remember to shine your light for the world to see. Until next time, have a great day. Bye-bye.